right, we are ready to get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Cowett. I am Assistant Executive Director at CAS, Connecticut Association of Schools. This morning, thank you all for joining us. This is such important information that everybody needs to know. This morning, we are joined by Joanne Freiberg and Pat Ciccone. Joanne and Pat have a wealth of experience in this realm. Joanne, as a former consultant for the state of Connecticut, who's been involved with bullying and school climate legislation for many, many years. And Pat, as a K through 12 educator and former superintendent, who also has had school climate at the front of her vision for equally as many years. Together, they are School Climate Consultants, LLC, and are great friends to CAS as we support building leaders in the latest legislative requirements. If you are looking for trainings around restorative practice and related topics, please visit the CAS website. Once you go to the CAS website, in the upper left are our training registrations, and the links are already there for next year. So also, I just want to let everybody know that we are recording this session. It will be available. So for those of you who are in the midst of Monday morning busyness, if you need to step away, we are recording and we will send it out to everyone, send the link, and it also will be on our website and on School Climate Consultants, LLC within the next 48 hours or so. All right. We are going to be using the chat website, or the chat site. Chat column is easiest. So if you have questions or comments, please put it there. And we will stop periodically to answer questions as they are applicable, or save some of the questions to the end if we need to. The webinar is 2 hours, so we will be done around 11 o'clock. Without further ado, I turn it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's really great to be here, and thank you all for joining. This is really important stuff. We've waited so long for this to happen. So without further ado, let me share this. Let me also say that these slides, in addition to the recording, will also be posted on our website on the homepage. Just scroll down, as well as the legislation itself and other related documents. But that way, everybody can follow this along. Now, what we want to do today is take you through where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so let me just talk briefly about the history of bullying. Some of you have been there for the beginning. This is 25 years old, but some of you are coming to it relatively new. One of the ways we've been trying to deal with bullying is through signage and through assemblies with kids. And not only do these strategies not work, since nobody sees themselves as a bully, nobody looks at these and says, wow, great reminder. So we've got to change the way we deal with this arena. Now, what is bullying? Well, interestingly enough, bullying, bully, bullier, any version of that word is a label. Or it's a conclusion of an investigation, but bullying is not a behavior. So when somebody says, I've been bullied, you have to say, what happened? Now, that's where we are with all of this stuff. Now, the reason for all these bullying laws since the very beginning is to honor what is known as the spirit or the point of the law, not merely the letter of the law. And there have been national school climate standards. We're going to talk a little bit about the Connecticut School Climate Standards, which were ushered in with this piece of legislation we're here to talk about today. But Standard 4 of the National School Climate Standards is really the spirit of all these laws. Legislators have had wonderful intentions to create truly physically, emotionally, and intellectually safe and positive learning environments for every single school community member, student and adult alike. That's been the point. Now, this is Standard 4 of the National School Climate Standards. The school community creates an environment where all members are welcome, supported, and feel safe in school. socially, emotionally, intellectually, culturally, and physically. That's been the point since the very beginning. But right now, all 50 states have some kind of anti-bullying law, and they all define bullying. But there are 50 different definitions of bullying. The only commonality that the experts agree upon throughout the world is that bullying is about an abuse of power. And what's kind of interesting is that if you go to a dictionary, because we've had bullies and bullying since, for centuries, but a pre-Columbine, Columbine was April 20th, 1999, dictionary definition of bullying is one habitually cruel to others, weaker than himself. Now, the post-Columbine dictionary definition is a person who habitually seeks to harm or intimidate those whom they perceive as vulnerable. So it has changed just a teeny bit, but that notion of an abuse of power remains. Now, this is a chart that shows when states first passed anti-bullying statutes. And you have to remember Columbine, which was April 20th, 1999. And you can see that Georgia was the first state in the nation to pass an anti-bullying law, and it was 2 to 3 months after Columbine. Now, all of these laws are reactive. They are not preventative. And there was no bullying statutory requirements prior to Columbine. Now, you can see that Connecticut first passed their anti-bullying statute in 2002. And in part, this was in reaction to a very tragic student suicide of a young man named J. Daniel Scruggs. Some of you may remember that. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And Connecticut was among the first 5th in the nation to pass an anti-bullying law. Now, the reason why Connecticut and Wyoming are listed in purple, those are the only two states that mentioned the phrase school climate in the legislation with bullying, but it is mostly in passing. It had nothing to do with it. Now, I also want to point out the reactivity of these laws by mentioning Missouri, which first passed their anti-bullying law in 2008. Originally, Missouri was just a cyberbullying law in reaction to a young lady who was pursued online, who she thought was a boyfriend, and who then jilted her. It turned out it was the mother of an ex-girlfriend, and she ended up committing suicide. And again, Missouri put in a cyberbullying law. It is now a complete bullying statute. But here's what's happened. None of these statutes have worked to create safe environments. So they have been amended over and over and over again, hundreds of times throughout the country. You'll see our progression shortly, but they just haven't worked to achieve the goals of safe environments. So there are really 3 overlapping worlds of inappropriate behavior. There's bullying, and neither Pat nor I are here today to suggest that there is no bullying, okay? That's not why we're here. But there's also protected class harassment, and then there's criminal behavior. And you can see that these stand alone, but they also overlap. Now, what has happened up to this point is that the definitions are blind to context until 2023 here in Connecticut. And what we mean is that the context of the situation does not matter. The situations are held up to fixed or blind factors. For example, how many times did an individual target somebody else? Did it happen over a 2-week or a 3-month period? And what was the action? These kinds of things, which are very often articulated in the definitions, really don't matter about the age of the child or the particular action and so on. So we can look at student or parent handbooks, we can look at progressive discipline rubrics or classroom expectations, or any of these predetermined definitions to see that these are made prior to considering any context. Now, some students, as you all know, out of the starting gate are not able to comply with classroom expectations because of their levels of trauma, and or their parents or guardians are the ones that keep them from being prepared, hurting others as role models, their ability to understand or speak English, or their individual challenges, whether they have a IEP or a 504, and countless other reasons. Now, here is an example. It is a real example out of a Connecticut middle school handbook of what happens when you abuse a pass, which means exceeding a reasonable time or failure to report to the designated location after receiving permission. Now, you all know that what goes on very often in middle and high schools right now is that young people text each other in class to meet in a restroom at the same time and stay there an awful long time together. You can see that the first time it's a warning, it moves to detentions, it moves to hallway restrictions, and then goes all the way to out of school suspension. If this kind of discipline worked, we wouldn't need 2 through 6. So what we know is that the context of the situation matters. This is where we get authenticity. How old are the individuals involved? Is the child 3 or 4, or are they 13 or 18? What are their respective circumstances? Do they have an IEP or a 504? What are their trauma levels, their language difficulties, if they have had great social mobility, as do many of our foster children and others, their family circumstances, their levels of social or relational skills, and many, many other relevant factors. These all matter in determining decisions. So here is the history of our bullying statutes. And I'm sure you all know, although we inform parents of this all the time, that the first 2 numbers in the Public Act numbers refer to the year it was passed. So we received our first anti-bullying law after the J. Daniel Scruggs suicide in 2002. It didn't work so well. We amended it in 2006, again in 2008. We got sweeping changes in 2011. Then, of course, Sandy Hook happened, and then we got the Public Act 13.3, which also had requirements for safe school climate committees and so on. In 2014, it seemed every legislator wanted to get their name on anti-bullying legislation, and they passed 3 separate statutes. They went back at it in 2019. In 2021, they legislated a school climate and SEL task force. And finally, we are at Public Act 23-167, which was the omnibus legislation that contains the current legislation that brings us here today. Again, all of these slides are going to be posted for you, so you don't have to take notes. So what we wanted to do, and I'm not going to read every one of these definitions, but it is very, very interesting to follow Connecticut's amendments to the anti-bullying statute, the original ones, by their definitions. This was the first definition in 2002, and you can just see by the font size and the amount of information that the definition changed every single time. In 2006, it was an overt act. In 2008, it was very, very detailed. In 2011, it got even more detailed. So we keep adding things again because it didn't work. The legislators thought, well, let's just keep adding on more to these definitions. In 2014, the definition changed yet again. In 2019, it changed again. And in 2019, it was attempting to align with the protected class harassment definitions, which, excuse me, again, that was the point, but it wasn't completely helpful because things like socioeconomic status and academic status and physical appearance aren't protected classes. So it was incredibly confusing. Now, what happened with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they attempted to, to create a common definition, which they issued in 2014. And what's interesting is that this definition, which isn't, I believe, adopted in any complete form by any other state, they say it's unwanted aggressive behavior by another group or group of youths who are not siblings or current dating partners that involves an observed or perceived power imbalance, on and on and on. But what's interesting is that we have had for a very long time teen dating violence, which has been thrown into our bullying statute. So again, the CDC, and there's a very long document that articulates how they arrived at this definition, but it hasn't been successful. So here is the 2023 bullying definition in our new legislation. Bullying means unwanted and aggressive behavior among children in grades kindergarten to 12, inclusive, that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. In other words, the legislation goes back to the commonality. And although we all know that adults engage in bullying behavior in this sense, in our current legislation, adults do not apply, or their behavior does not apply. But this is very importantly context dependent. And this is if you could see the date, it's 2008, this little cartoon. Again, the first pane is correct. It's about abuse of power in the school context. But we believe that almost all of the inappropriate behaviors in not just K to 8 classrooms, but K to 12 classrooms are not power abusives. So who determines whether it's a power imbalance? And this is very important for all of you because it's the investigator. It's not the parent. It's not the child. I mean, think about the craziness of having 2 5-year-olds on a playground. One of them picks up a rock and starts to throw it at somebody else. I guess because he has a rock in his hand, it's a power imbalance, but that's not what a reasonable person would believe. So you, as the investigator, get to determine whether it's a power imbalance. The vast majority of inappropriate social interactions are not power imbalances. They're just kids trying to figure out how to navigate the social world. And they're as good as their role model. So many of them have parents who abuse their power, or coaches who abuse their power, or mentors who abuse their power. And this is certainly not it's the exception, not the rule. But kids are as good as the role models they have. And what is hoped by this change in definition is that it should help avoid labeling kids bullies. Pat and I agree that we see no benefit, no real benefit in labeling any student a bully. We don't know what that achieves. It may make the target or the target's family feel as though they've been validated, but it's sort of a lose-lose situation. And that is one of the reasons why we're very happy that the definition went as it did. Another really important piece of all this is that we often hear, oh, it's a joke, I didn't mean anything by it. But the intent is very different than the impact. And one of the things that we need to help young people understand is that the impact may be incredibly hurtful. It may be discriminatory. There may be not only personal implications or consequential outcomes, but there may be legal outcomes depending upon how and why a person is impacted. So students need to understand that just because they didn't intend for something to be hurtful, it lands that way. And so that's a very important distinction. But the world of bullying, protected class, and criminal behavior in schools is really incredibly small compared to however you want to call it, the mean-spirited, unwanted, inappropriate behavior, challenging behavior, that's what's going on. And that's what we need to manage. Previous bullying statutes only obligated schools to do something when it was labeled bullying. And we know from the State Department data that less than 0.1%, believe it or not, 0.13%, or about 0.1% of children in Connecticut get labeled bullies. So even though most schools did the right thing in the interest of helping kids be safe, that was not the legal obligation. So with all of the changes in the legislation and definitions, and with each new amendment, eliminating bullying has been a huge challenge. We've always called it whack-a-mole. You know, with the definition changing, you hit it here, it pops up there. And what we know from talking with dozens and dozens, hundreds of principals, that many of you spend well over 50% of your time just investigating bullying allegations. And in the prior legislations or amendments, it has been incredibly onerous, the details you have to go through and the steps and the procedures. Everybody investigates everything, and you don't have that same list of onerous details. So school administrators want to create physically, emotionally, culturally, racially, and intellectually safe schools. That's what they would prefer to spend their time on rather than investigating bullying, because the ultimate remedy for bullying is to create a wonderful school climate that doesn't support any of those kind of behaviors. So that's what we want to focus the attention on, creating and maintaining positive school climates, classrooms and school environments that do not support any form of mean-spirited, challenging, inappropriate behaviors, physically, emotionally, culturally, racially, intellectually, that are happy and healthy for everyone, not just for some. For years, we've called these climates of respect. So let's now move into the new legislation. And if any of you have any comments, I don't know, Tiffany, is this a point where you want to have anybody ask any questions?
Yeah, so the question that's up on the board right now, are school administrators ever consulted when the laws are made in Connecticut?
In this case, we believe that we have talked with dozens and dozens of school administrators. I'm not so sure in the past how much force those voices have had, because parent voices tended to be much louder. And so legislators were hearing from parents and not so much listening to administrators on the ground. I don't know, Pat, do you want to weigh in on that question at all?
Yeah, I saw the question, and I think during this, the passage of the 2023 legislation, there was a tremendous effort, not only by those of us who were on the collaborative working, but also legislators themselves. As we talked with more and more of them, particularly on the Education Committee, they asked many administrators, they had conversations with them within the jurisdiction of their own school districts. So this time out of the box, we were really very excited to have administrator voices. And by the way, just in terms of that stat of, you know, many administrators reporting spending upwards of 50% of their days involved in and locked down in investigating allegations of bullying. We heard from many who said that their time was closer to 70%. So lots of administrators weighing in and lots of legislators talking with school administrators. That's a very different dynamic than we've had for years.
Anything else, Tiffany, or should we continue forward?
Continue on.
All right. So here's what's happened. And Pat and I and the Connecticut, Pat mentioned the collaborative, the SEL School Climate Collaborative, which has been in existence for probably about 5 years now. we really used the collaborative as a platform for correcting all of the what we consider to be misguided efforts to achieve safe places for kids. So 20 and more years of anti-bullying legislation has gotten Connecticut no closer to the goal of creating safe places for children to learn and adults to work. So to correct these almost 25 years worth of good intentions, this new legislation now supports districts to focus primarily on improving the climates in all their schools rather than focusing exclusively on eliminating bullying. In other words, we're turning this whole thing on its head. And the legislators listened. They listened intently. Connecticut had a vetted school climate policy, which was adopted in 2014, which operationalized the National School Climate Standards. And this articulated the spirit of these decades of statutory work. So really for a decade, and CABE gave it its own number, 5131.914. You all know that the bullying legislation in the CABE number is 5131.911. So Connecticut now has updated the 2014 school climate policy and tailored the National School Climate Standards to become the Connecticut School Climate Standards. So this is the essence of our dream, having worked immensely and intensively with this legislation over the past 25 years. Although several districts have passed and are working under the 2014 Connecticut School Climate Policy, some districts have also had to balance those goals while simultaneously operating under their existing anti-bullying policy. And again, 5131.911. Now you need to know that Shipman and Goodwin worked intensively on 5131.914 so that it was rock solid legally. But our dream, and when I say our dream, certainly it was Pat and my dream, but I think it was also collectively the dream of countless educational organizations, superintendents, principals, and so on. Our dream turned into reality with the passage of 23-167 by the Connecticut legislature on June 7th, 2023. So almost a full year, and now codified in statute. This allows districts to adopt the Connecticut School Climate Policy as soon as possible, but requires adoption by July 1st of 2025. We're going to get into a timeline. When so passed, they will no longer operate under standing district and anti-bullying policy. The Connecticut School Climate Policy, which now has 5131.911, replaces the existing anti-bullying policy. And we know that this change has and will continue to benefit children exponentially. So just to punctuate, don't want anybody to be confused. The Board of Education in any district must adopt the Connecticut School Climate Policy no later than July 1st of 2025. But the minute it is adopted, so if the policy committee moves it on to the full board and they adopt that policy, the existing anti-bullying policy goes away. So there should be incentive to pass this as soon as possible. So, Tiffany, are there any questions before we move forward to the requirements in the statute?
Yes, there is one. Do private schools and APSEPs approved private special ed placements also have to adopt the policy?
Private schools are not subject to the law. I don't think private school special ed facilities are either, but I'm not, Pat, would you know?
I believe that if they are receiving students as referrals from public schools as an alternative, that's a different type of special ed service. They are. So it's public schools, parochial schools, charter schools.
Parochial schools are not.
Not charters, but magnets.
Magnets, charters, but not parochial schools because they're private. Now, one of the things that has happened for many private schools is they want to be in parity with public schools. And so they have adopted some kind of anti-bullying policy. I would think that it would be to their advantage to adopt the Connecticut School Climate Policy because it supports really any mission that any school would want to do, but there's no obligation to do so. So
There's, Joanne, before you go on, there's a little bit of confusion around the 5131.911 and 5131.914, which was what CAIC gave as a number to the climate policy that was written. So do you want to just clarify that for folks?
yes,
The question is, does the new 5131.911 replace 5131.914?
yes, it does. But the most important thing to know, originally when 5131.914 was passed, you still were obligated to work under 5131.911. So those had to happen together. What the legislature did very carefully is give the amended 914 a 911 number so that we wouldn't be operating under two different statutes. And so it replaces not only 914, but it replaces the 911 anti-bullying stuff. That's what goes away. But the anti-bullying policy remains in effect until a Board of Ed passes the new 911. I
Right.
hope
To be clear, those are policies. Those are the policies. So for the individual asking the question, 5131.911 in its new form is and will be the policy that we operate under, no longer having to deal with two different policies.
I hope that clarifies. Can somebody give us a sign and let us know? The last thing we want to be is confusing here. All right. I will move on in that case, Tiffany, unless you have other questions.
No, I'm going to say there are a couple within the Q&A. There's a couple of other, like just there's a statement of the 3 independent academies that are in Connecticut, as well as somebody mentioning RESCs, who are public schools.
They would
and that
have to do
CES
that.
Correct. I'm just going to qualify by saying, like, if anybody has any questions, check with your attorney, your local Board of Ed, your superintendent, if you are confused about who has to adopt it.
Yeah, but the Norwich Free Academy, Gilbert School, so on, Woodstock Academy, yes, those have to, as do the rest, because they run schools that are, but yes. But again, Tiffany's absolutely right. Go back to your attorneys. Okay, so let's look at the legislation itself. And these are the pages. I mean, again, it had so much legislation, and at the end of last year, they put all the legislation together that got passed, and we're very fortunate that this legislation ended up inside it. So these are outlines of what's in every section. So in section 47, it outlines the relevant sections, and it defines 16 words of key importance to the statute. These are the 16 words that are defined. Now, what's interesting is that when we get to the policy itself, these 16 words and 2 additional ones are used. So in section 48, it establishes the SEL collaborative, which must finalize the school climate standards, which it's done. It was obligated to create a uniform challenging behavioral form. Now, it did so, but let me be real clear on this, because in my expert opinion, Pat's expert opinion, and a number of others, it is not a good form. It has checkoff boxes. It sort of assumes conclusions before, and it is out there, but it is not a mandatory form to use, okay? You do not have to use it, and that was made very clear at the collaborative. Some of us are working on a much more generic form. In fact, on our website right now, we have a pretty good generic form that has been used for the last decade, and our board attorneys have allowed it. So feel free to go to our website. On the home page, just scroll down and it says everything you need to know about the legislation. That's where we'll post these slides. There's an earlier version of them and the recording, but there's a pretty good form. We did not post the form that the collaborative issued. Now, in section 48, it also provides guidance on the implementation of the climate policy. In section 49, it dictates that schools may adopt this new 911 policy between July 1st of last year and June 30th of 2025, but they must or they shall adopt it no later than July 1st of 2025. All of us working on this statute were very explicit with the legislature. Please allow a phase-in for this policy. Don't just put it out there and demand that people do it within the next week. You all know what happened, or those of you who are affected by the kindergarten legislation, where there was no phase-in. And so we were very careful to give schools a couple of years in which to do this. And to clarify what we've been talking about, the new 911 replaces the last 2009 version of 911, which is anti-bullying legislation. In section 50, it says no later than July 1st, the superintendent has to appoint the district school climate coordinator, and it outlines what the school climate coordinator's duties are. Now, all of these duties show up in the policy, so I'm not going to read all of these now. In section 51, it talks about the school climate specialist, and it needs to be a principal or employee with professional certification. It's not just anybody. And it also says that the school climate specialist must be trained in school climate improvement or restorative practices. We hope it's both. Tiffany mentioned at the outset, we have a wonderful relationship and collaboration with CAS, as we do at CES and at Advance, to offer these trainings. And at least at CAS, the training sessions that we're offering for next year, at least for restorative practices, are posted on the CAS site as well as on ours. This also dictates the duties of the school climate specialist. In section 52, it talks about the committee and what the committee must have. In section 52, second part, it talks about the responsibilities of the committee. Again, this shows up in the policy, so I'm not going to read every section here. And in section 53, it talks about surveying and who needs to be surveyed. In section 54, it talks about developing a school climate improvement plan. And this school climate improvement plan doesn't have to begin until July 1st of 2025, but must be re-upped every year by the end of the fiscal year. No, not the fiscal year, the calendar year, December 31st of each year. And it must be made available to the public. Now, that could be part of an overall district improvement plan or a school improvement plan. In section 55, it talks about training. And again, we've developed wonderful relationships with folks to make sure that training is easily accessible. Now, in section 71, it talks about the school climate improvement plan, which must align with the standards to enhance safety and address challenging behavior. All of this shows up in the school climate policy. In section 71, there are safeguards for students with IEPs and 504s, tiered responses for challenging behaviors, annual reports must be issued around this. But again, we're hoping that we don't feel the need to label children bullies. We're hoping that this will manage challenging behavior in an appropriate way. Okay, section 74, that no later than July 1st, the local Board of Ed adopts restorative practices response policy, which is again in the policy which we'll go over. And there was a lot of conversation around school resource officers in the 2023 year. And one of the things that is pushed into this is that the challenging behavior shouldn't have the SRO involved unless it escalates to violence or criminal matters. So any questions so far before we get to the policy? Or are we good?
We do have a question regarding whether or not, well, some folks are having a little trouble finding the bullying investigation template on, I think they mean School Climate Consultants website. So we could put something into the chat for that.
Well, if you go to the home, just let me mention, if you go to the home page, schoolclimateconsultants.com, and just scroll down, it's one long page, and it says everything you need to know about the 2023 legislation. If you click on that, you can download the form.
And then the final question that's there right now is, does the school climate coordinator have to hold an 092 now? So that's section 50 of the statute. This question is basically saying, do you have to hold an administrator certification in order to be the school climate coordinator?
I believe the answer is yes.
Yes, that is at the district level. So the superintendent can certainly be the school climate coordinator, but the superintendent can appoint a designee from the administrative ranks.
We were trying to guide this toward not having anybody, who may or may not have expertise around schools, whether it's a facilities manager, or, I mean, there's some crazy kinds of folks who were given that role of school climate coordinator. And so we really wanted to make sure that they were knowledgeable and able to lead this kind of, so for example, head of human resources may not hold an 092, and that would keep them from being that. So, okay, I'll move forward with the school climate policy, and here's where we'll go in a little bit more detail. This is the policy statement of the Connecticut School Climate Policy. This policy sets forth the framework for an effective and informed school climate improvement process, which includes a continuous cycle of planning and preparation, evaluation, action planning, and implementation, and serves to actualize the Connecticut School Climate Standards. So these are the definitions in the policy, and they are the 16 definitions or words, phrases that are in the statute, but there's 3 more. A positive and sustained school climate, evidence-based practices, and effective school climate improvement are also defined in the policy. So this is what the school climate coordinator needs to do: provides district level leadership and support for implementation of the school climate improvement plans. And notice that they are school-based. School climate improvement plans make no sense at the district level. If you have an elementary school, or you have 5 elementary schools stretched all over the town, some have completely different demographics. So each different school climate improvement plan is school-based. Now, collaborating with the school climate specialists to develop a continuum of strategies to respond to challenging behavior, including but not limited to bullying and harassment. Understand that there is bullying, there is harassment, but they have the obligation or the responsibility to deal with any kind of challenging, inappropriate, mean-spirited, whatever you want to call it. They also need to communicate such strategies to the school community, including but not limited to the district student handbook. The school climate coordinator must also collect and maintain data regarding school climate improvement and meet with each school climate specialist at least twice a year to identify strategies to improve school climate and respond to challenging behavior, propose recommendations for revisions to the school climate improvement plans, and assist with the completion of the school climate survey. Now, importantly, the school climate coordinator could meet with everybody at once, twice a year. It doesn't have to be individual meetings. Now, the school climate specialist must lead in the prevention and response to challenging behavior, including but not limited to bullying and harassment. They must help implement evidence or research-based interventions, including but not limited to restorative practices. They must schedule meetings for and lead the school climate committee, and they must lead the implementation of the school climate improvement plan. Now, the school climate committee membership must have the school climate specialist, a teacher selected by the exclusive bargaining representative for certified employees, a demographically representative group of students enrolled at school as developmentally appropriate. If you have a pre-K to 2 school, chances are good you're not going to have student representatives. But if you're a middle school, a high school, you may well have student representatives. Families of students enrolled at the school, and at least 2 members of the school community as determined by the school climate specialist. Now, what's really important is that the membership of the school climate committee shall be annually approved and reviewed by the school climate specialist in coordination with the school climate committee. And what we mean by that, and very explicitly and importantly, it means that if somebody is recommended or volunteers to be on the committee who is intent on, and I'm going to say this for emphasis sake, sabotaging the work, and one knows that, whether it's a parent, whether it's a faculty member, doesn't believe in restorative work or whatever, the school climate coordinator and specialist can say, no, we don't want that person on. So it's not, there are checks and balances so that it's an appropriate process to honor the work.
And Joanne, could you just go back 1 second? Okay, just to be clear, that membership of the school climate committee that's going to be annually reviewed and approved has to be done by the school climate specialist in coordination with the school climate coordinator. So you can see that it would involve the school-based individuals as well as the district level leader of that effort, the school climate coordinator.
Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so here are the school climate committee responsibilities. And if you were to look back historically at the school climate committee and what they were charged to do, most of what they were charged to do in the legislation, they couldn't do it because it would violate FERPA, it would violate other kinds of things. So this is a correction and very doable for a school climate committee. They must assist in the development, annual scheduling, and administration of the school climate survey and review that data. They must use that survey data to identify strengths and challenges to improve school climate and/or to create or propose revisions to the improvement plan. They must assist in the implementation of the improvement plan and recommend recommend any improvements or revisions, and the committee advises on strategies to improve school climate and implementing research or evidence-based interventions, including but not limited to restorative practices to the school community. I just want to interject here that working restoratively is mentioned 19 times in the school climate policy. So bottom line, schools have to start working restoratively, but that's not all they have to do, but they have to start working restoratively. And annually providing notice of the uniform challenging behavior complaint form or similar complaint form used by the school to the school community. Again, I hope that you can find, if not, we'll make sure that it's very easily identified so you can find that form. Now, the school climate survey for the school year commencing July 1st, 2025, and biennially thereafter, the school climate committee for each school shall administer a school climate survey to students, school employees, and families of students, provided the parent or guardian of each student shall receive prior written notice of the content and administration of such school climate survey, and shall have a reasonable opportunity to opt such students out of such survey. Now, I do know that the collaborative is meeting in the near future, and I think that there's work going forward around a common survey, but that's for a later date. But there is work to do that. Now, for the school year beginning July 1st, 2025, and annually thereafter, the school climate specialist for each school, in coordination with the school climate coordinator, shall develop and update the school climate improvement plan. It shall be based on the results of the survey, any recommendations from the committee, protocols and supports, and other data that the school climate coordinator deems relevant. The improvement plan shall be submitted to the coordinator no later than December 31st of each school year, and upon approval of the improvement plan by the coordinator, a written or electronic copy of the improvement plan shall be made available to the members of the school climate community. Each improvement plan shall be used in the prevention and identification of and response to all challenging behaviors. And as I said earlier, districts may place the school climate improvement plan into their district and school improvement plans. So you don't have to do an extra one. You just have to make sure that within your school-based or your district improvement plans, that school climate is dealt with. Now, here's training requirements. For the school year beginning July 1st, 2024, and annually thereafter, each local and regional board of education shall provide resources and training to school employees regarding social emotional learning, school climate and culture, and research around evidence-based interventions and restorative practices. And Pat and I believe that training around restorative practices actually satisfies all of that. We do provide extra targeted training around school climate, but restorative practices really is the biggest umbrella, and we'll talk about that shortly. Such resources and training may be made available at each school under the jurisdiction of the Board of Ed and include technical assistance in the implementation of the improvement plan. Any school employee may participate in any such training offered by the Board of Ed. The school climate coordinator shall select and approve the individuals or organization that will provide such training. Funding. The school district shall, in its discretion, allocate sufficient funding to satisfy the requirements of this policy for all schools in the district. Such funding shall be distributed accordingly with superintendent approval for assessments and professional development, as well as for school community outreach, training, and technical assistance. And the board shall adopt and allocate adequate resources to support the Connecticut School Climate Policy and adhere to state regulations set forth in Public Act 23-167. So before we go forward to look at the standards, what are the questions around the policy? And by the way, the policy, the Connecticut School Climate Policy, is also hosted and can be downloaded on our website.
So we have a little backup question regarding the school climate specialist and whether or not they also must be holding an 092 or be a member of the administration. And that has not been true. And I don't think it's demanded by the legislation. If there is an individual who is part of the leadership committee, remember this person is leading the parade, so to speak, and making sure that there's compliance with all of the other requirements and mandates for the school improvement plan. It's probably helpful to have an administrator or at least someone who's on the administrative leadership team.
I think that that's what is the requirement, but let me throw in something that has happened in a pretty standard way that we believe should not happen. And that's that a member of the counseling staff or pupil personnel staff be appointed the specialist. That is really an ethical conflict of interest, because here pupil personnel staff, social workers, counselors, psychologists, really are supposed to maintain confidentiality when they speak with students especially. And students should feel comfortable going to them with confidential matters. And when you place a member of the pupil personnel staff as the school climate specialist, that puts them in I want to say, an untenable situation. So frankly, from an ethical, moral standpoint, I would not name somebody from the pupil personnel staff as the school climate specialist.
So we also have a question regarding trainings that may be required specifically for the school climate specialist or the school climate coordinator. And essentially, those are the same trainings that everyone should receive. If you're training in restorative practices, that's the training. However, there are advanced trainings for individuals who are going to be holding roles or putting their attention toward facilitating trainings in their own buildings or carrying things to a greater level so that if new people are coming in, they can sort of catch them up, if you will, and do trainings in the schools.
And build capacity themselves so they're not always looking for outside training. And in fact, just this year, we have held probably a half a dozen two-day school restorative practice trainings. We're holding a handful of one-day school climate trainings. And for anybody who has taken those 3 days of training, they have satisfied the prerequisites for a 5-day advanced training where they go deeper into all of the topics, but also, again, are trained. It's really a train the trainer kind of model. So we fully plan to do that again next summer, but it's happening this summer as well, both at CAS and at CES. That is posted on our website, but if anybody wants to know specifically, you can reach out to us.
So there is a question that I think is an important question, and that is the training for all staff members in the buildings or in the building? And I think, Joanne, you might want to reference the Yale philosophy of every face.
Every face is important. And in fact, CAS has asked us if we would do a full 2-day training, same training where we do for certified staff and so on, just for non-certified staff in paras. And that's happening in the second half of October. And I'm sure if that is filled, we could add another one, space availability. But the point is, yes, it's very important for every individual to be trained. And for those district leaders, superintendents, assistant superintendents, and so on, we've had many come to training already. We understand that district leadership may well not be the ones on the ground making this happen within the buildings, but it is critically important because they're leaders and setting policies and talking to parents and working with a competing set of policies and practices and strategies, that they are very much knowledgeable so that they can have the backs of those who are on the ground. So yes, every single face.
And then always an important question with regard to compliance and making sense out of what you're providing for your staffs is how will we know if a professional learning resource is recognized for this purpose? And I think, you know, we always want to be careful when we're choosing professional development purveyors. I think we all have to recognize that restorative practices is not only just coming into its own across the country, throughout schools, organizations, justice system, corrections, etc., but we also need to know that it's becoming a buzzword. And so, you know, you always want to do as important an effort as you can possibly put toward it in terms of vetting folks, their backgrounds and so on, because there are a lot of different professional learning opportunities. Here in Connecticut, we're so fortunate that whoever is doing training, there are a lot of folks that are primary organizations that we all know and trust, CAS, CES, Ed Advance, are sponsoring. Those are important places to look.
Let me just follow that question by saying that one of the misimplementation pitfalls around restorative practices is bringing it in what we call as a narrow sense. In other words, just a different way to discipline. And when the focus of the training is almost exclusively on the problem solving, as opposed to the wider climate and building of the relationships, schools tend to fail. And so it's very important that a lot of the content, which is our orientation, be focused on the building of the communities and the relationships, so that when there are disagreements and conflicts and so on, if you build it, it can be repaired. So again, I would just word of mouth, go to your organization, see what they say. We're not the only ones out there. We pride ourselves on doing a good job, but we're not the only ones.
And remember that this set of slides is available to you. And embedded in this set of slides are clarifications around what's required legislatively, but also look at the phrases and sections that anything you're doing regarding social and emotional learning, restorative practices, etc. There are 19 different descriptors, definitions of what you should be looking for.
So let's look at the standards, because these are at the core of the policy. All right, this is what the policy is based on. And these are the updated National School Climate Standards. So there are only 5 standards. Here is standard 1. The school district has a shared vision and plan for promoting and sustaining a positive school climate that focuses on prevention, identification, and response to all challenging behavior. This is standard 2. The school district community adopts policies that promote a sound school environment that develops and sustains academic, social, emotional, ethical, civic, and intellectual skills, and a restorative school environment focused on overcoming barriers to teaching and learning by building and supporting meaningful school-wide relationships and intentionally re-engaging any disengaged students, educators, and families of students in the school community. Standard 3, the school community's practices are identified, prioritized, and supported to promote learning and the positive academic, social, emotional, ethical, and civic development of students, enhance engagement in teaching, learning, and school-wide activities, address barriers to learning, teaching and learning, and develop and sustain a restorative infrastructure that builds capacity, accountability, and sustainability. This is standard 4. The school community creates a school environment where everyone is safe, welcome, supported, and included in all school-based activities. And standard 5, the school community creates a restorative system that cultivates a sense of belonging through norms and activities that promote social and civic responsibility and a dedication to cultural responsiveness, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are the 5 standards.
So Joanne, before you go on, there is an important question, and I think it probably resonates with everyone, which is what about educating parents about restorative practices, as they are some of the biggest critics of this practice? And I think if you've just listened to those climate standards, you can see how often working restoratively is mentioned. But parents are often critical, and I totally agree, because they don't know what they don't know. So training and educating parents about these processes and about what restorative practices are is going to really help to give them the same language that the schools are using and the same understanding. Right now, parents, as well as many educators, are operating under the sense of the myths surrounding restorative practices, the touchy-feely, no accountability, etc., thoughts about these practices, when we know that when you go through training, you learn very quickly. It is all about holding people accountable for their behaviors in ways that teach skills and promote social and civic responsibility inside the schools. So absolutely, yes, training parents as well. We have very good success going out and speaking with parents. Sometimes the biggest issue is they just don't know about it.
I can also add to what Pat's saying is that you now have parents very carefully placed on the school climate committee. And although it's not explicitly stated as a requirement in the school climate improvement plan, I would think bringing parents along on this journey, and it is a journey, would be a very appropriate thing to include in the school climate improvement plan and for the committee to champion. Again, Pat's absolutely right. Parents are incredibly receptive. They find themselves, as we say in training, you'll be a better parent yourself if you have all of these strategies. So yes, 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 parents, guardians, community members, and so on. So Pat, is there anything else before we move on?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so let's move to the timeline. We wanted to put a 1-slide timeline here so that you all have a very easy way to look at what's required. And I hope you can, we tried to alternate font color so you could see. On the far left, June 7th, 2023 was when this passed. Now, no later than July 1st of 2024, school districts must provide training and technical assistance for improvement plan implementation. Now, CAS and CES and Ed Advance have been getting ahead of the game and trying to offer training prior to that date. But again, that has to be put in place. Now, up until June 30th of 2025, school districts may adopt the new 911. Now, upon adoption, the provisions in the school climate policy apply. So you're out from under the bullying statute, it just goes away. Now, no later than July 1st of 2025, school districts must adopt 5131.911. Same thing, you're out from under the bullying policy. Now, no later than the school year beginning July 1st of 2025, school districts must conduct school climate surveys and then biennially thereafter. Now, no later than July 31st of 2025, the improvement plans are due to the school climate coordinator for approval and subsequent implementation, and they are due annually by this date every year thereafter. So these are the timeline in one place. Are there any questions about the timeline? All right, we'll keep going then. So let's start to look at where we've been and what this restorative stuff is all about. Now, some of you, I'm sure, have been trained. Others of you are anticipating what's this going to do. But typically, we look at various aspects of our work in silos. We definitely want to help kids learn. We have gross inequities, and they're not just racial and cultural. We have access to technology, socioeconomic, all kinds of inequities out there. We certainly want to further social emotional learning, and there is trauma, all kinds of trauma. But they aren't siloed. They are intimately connected. So all of these things have to be brought together, and we want to bring everything together on the same page. And we believe, and Pat and I are creatures of research and experience. I'm not smart enough to make anything up, but we believe that restorative work is the glue that holds everything together, and it actually achieves social justice. And all of these efforts have to be embedded in day-to-day practice. This is not, restorative work is not one more thing to do. And anybody who walks away from training thinking that they have one more thing to do is very misguided, because this is how you do what you do. So in 2018, many of you may remember the classroom safety bill that was put forward that had some pretty significant issues with. And it was initially passed and then by the legislature. And then there was a very big scrambling to convince the governor to veto it because there were major issues. And Sabira Gordon was the very last to testify. And this is just a little over a minute of video. And in this video, and I will make sure that this little video clip, and we have one others, are also posted on our site around everything you need to know about the legislation, just so if you want to, because you'll have a PDF version of the slides, but we'll also make sure that if you want to share this with colleagues, you'll have the two video clips. She pulls a number of things together. She talks about the gross disproportionality of exclusionary discipline, and this is true across the state. It's true across the country. Children of color, children with special needs are disproportionately subjected to exclusionary discipline. She also talks about trauma at the very end when she speaks about the 6-year-old. But one of the things that she says is that restorative work is the only way we're going to get out of this. And what is kind of prophetic about what she said in June of 2018 is she was very sad that restorative work was not embedded in this legislation. Well, here we are 5 years later, and restorative work is embedded in the legislation. Now, I hope this isn't too jumpy, but just listen to it. It's very short. Here we go.
Every single time teachers are given the discretion, kids of color hurt. Every single time. There is a reason why suspensions, expulsions, every metric that you can use, kids of color are disproportionately impacted. It doesn't matter who's the teacher. We just have a system that has created inequities. And each time I was having this conversation, and I learned a lot about this process going through it with CEA and learned what this bill did and what this bill was going to address, where I think I walked away from it saying, I don't love it, and so can recall me saying this, but it's a place to start from, right? And that's where I ended. And I see the governor's veto as a way to continue this conversation. I was very disappointed that we weren't able to add restorative justice and restorative practices to the language, because I think The only way we're gonna solve any of these issues if we start addressing educational inequities in a restorative practice way. There is nothing a 6-year-old can do that is the 6-year-old's fault to get them kicked out of school. Anything that 6-year-old did that was so bad is as a result of an adult in that 6-year-old's life that created a space that allows that 6-year-old to have that kind of behavior.
All right, just a very short little clip.
Every single.
So if there, I'm just going to keep going, but Pat, let me know if there's any kind of questions or comments.
Okay.
School administrators know that the educators who naturally and intentionally create wonderful relationships with their students and their parents or guardians and build and nurture a positive classroom community, which we call as the climate, are the same educators who experience the highest academic achievement. It's the same group, a one-to-one correspondence. And it's this reality that provides the best theory of action, North Star, whatever you want to call it, for overall student success and district and school improvement. In other words, if you lead with relationships and community building, you get better academic outcomes. Because all learning is relational. Students don't care about what you know until they know you care. The myth is that we either teach or we focus on relationship building, which is wrong-headed. All instruction should be conducted through the lens of relationship building. So, for example, after some direct instruction in how to write a topic sentence, why not have students break up into partners and write a topic sentence together? They're not going to do it any less well than if they did it on their own, but they're learning to work with one another. This is what we mean by instructing through the lens of relationship building. And one of the things that Pat and I do very, very intentionally in our 2-day restorative practice training is we practice delivering the content through the lens of relationship and community building, which is what working restoratively is all about. Now, we know that these silos are actually, excuse me, converging lanes of traffic. And when students were brought back after COVID, those schools and districts that had prioritized relationships before schools closed down and brought them back with relationship and community building first, which is what we call working restoratively, have these converging lanes of traffic merge safely. For schools that led with instruction, making sure that that any kind of misbehavior was exited from the classroom so we could focus on instruction, and that was the most important thing, these lanes of traffic collided. So, any questions up to this point before we dive into a very quick overview of restorative practices and bust a couple myths before we open this up for questions?
Good.
We're good?
Questions in the chat.
Okay, so let's talk about restorative practices very briefly. And you notice in this title slide, we have increased the size of the word practices because that is, believe it or not, the most important word in this phrase. And working restoratively is how we do what we do. It's how we practice in the day-to-day. And what we like to say is practice before programs. It's all about the environment. If you want to achieve academic growth in math, it better be in a restorative environment. If you want to achieve social emotional growth, it better be in a restorative environment. So restorative practices is the largest umbrella we've ever seen. It allows for equity, SEL growth, learning gains, healing. It's the glue that holds everything together. So we believe that restorative practices as a title or label is confusing at best and unfortunate at worst. There are two words, restorative and practices. And we believe that the best synonym for restorative is healing. But restorative is the least of it. Now, we absolutely are going to solve problems, conflicts, repair harms, and so on. But unless we focus on the environment, about building, forming, and transforming the climate, there will be nothing to repair or restore. We like to say that's 80% of the work. Now, everything restorative emanates from something called the fundamental hypothesis. And restorative work works, is successful, because it's based on human biology and human psychology. So this comes out of that. Human beings, that's you, me, our students, our family members, our colleagues, our friends, human beings are happier, healthier, more productive and cooperative, and most likely to make positive changes in their own behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. So restorative practices is not a program or curriculum. It's not a discipline system. It's not just about reacting in a knee-jerk way when something happens. It's importantly not punitive. And so we're all on the same page. Punitive for us means exclusionary discipline, detention, suspensions, privilege denial. And it is importantly not a behaviorist approach. Now, we don't want to alienate behavior interventionists and so on, but we're really talking about putting relationships first, because restorative practices are a way of thinking and being. It's about changing climate and culture. It's about being highly proactive and responsive, and it is a relational approach. So there's a shift in thinking to what has to happen. And most of us came up, into a punitive world very, very honestly, where we focus on rule breaking. We figure out who did it, who didn't do it, guilt or innocence. We're not changing behavior. At best, we're suppressing it. And it is authority-driven disciplinary action, which is predetermined and blind to context. Now, the authority comes in two main forms. One is the person, the individual, the principal, the teacher. It could be the handbook, where we have 10 pages of, if you do this, then that happens. And this is completely blind to context. The accountability is doing your time. You get 3 days of lunch and detention, you serve those 3 days, and you go back as if everything's fixed. Nothing gets fixed. And we tend to use fear of punishment and exclusion to motivate positive behavior, and we use rewards, incentives. But again, this flies in the face of all research around what really motivates and engages. Now, a restorative approach has no fewer rules. I'll say that again. No fewer rules. High expectations. But when a rule has been broken or somebody has been harmed, we focus on who has been harmed and how, and we address needs, which means that the context matters. This is why it's equitable. We're using a process that does not change and is equitable for all. And we always recognize misbehavior as a learning opportunity. You don't have those skills, you need those skills. You need to learn them. Now, those impacted by the harm determine resolution collectively in circles. And that may be a literal classroom circle, but it may be two individuals sitting opposite one another. So it could be a metaphorical circle. The accountability is understanding the impact of what you did, taking responsibility, and then suggesting and implementing ways to repair the harm. And that's when we get positive behavior, is the opportunity to make amends and honorably reintegrate into the community. Now, this is the environment in which everything we do happens. And not only do the practices work, but as I said earlier, they align with the biology and psychology of being human. That's why this is not a fad. Restorative practices is here to stay. So some quick myth-busting metaphors. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, you see a big old tree that's fallen on the roof. After a storm, I'm sure. If you have a solidly built house, a strong community, and there's harm done, a tree falls on it, you can remove the tree, repair the roof, and nobody's ever going to know there was any harm. But if there's no house and a tree falls, there's nothing to repair. Now, the one in the upper left-hand corner is about growth. In the same way that babies become adults eventually, once you become restorative, you don't go back. You don't go back because it is a much more productive, successful, cooperative, happy place to be. It is, again, once you become a restorative individual, once you become a restorative school, you don't go back. But the last metaphor, which takes up the bottom half of this page, is what we call the family model. If in any family, if there is more than one child, or if you grew up in a family with siblings, the best way to describe those siblings are frenemies, friends and enemies. Sometimes they get along beautifully, and then at other times they are at war, sometimes doing physical damage, pulling hair, kicking, that kind of thing. But in a family, we don't look up a punishment for an altercation between siblings in a family handbook. We figure it out. We may give them some chill time, let's calm down, but we always bring them back together. We do not suspend out of families. That's the family model. And that is the model that restorative work is all about. And Pat and I are not crazy. There are times when children are so disruptive, dysregulated, unsafe, they cannot be in the classroom or even in the school. But those times are far fewer when we start working restoratively. So we are not saying, we want to make this very, very clear because there's often misunderstanding that there will be absolutely no suspensions ever again. We do know that the suspensions drop exponentially when you start working this way because you're solving problems, not just delivering exclusionary discipline. All right. So there are two restorative goals, and relationships are what is most important to people. We're hardwired that way. So being restorative means there's two main tasks: building and strengthening relationships and repairing those relationships and community when they've been harmed. But if you don't spend time on the former, and that's what I was saying earlier, schools and districts who get trained on how to solve problems restoratively, while just saying build relationships and community, and that's as close as you get, will fail. You need to understand what it takes to build relationships and communities. There are strategies around that as well. So although we've seen too many multi-tiered systems of support, we like to articulate our restorative work as a framework. But please don't think that this means identifying tier 1 kids, tier 2 kids, tier 3 kids. That's not what we're talking about. You notice there are bubbles in the background. People are like bubbles. We just go around sharing space, bopping around, getting to know one another, interacting, sharing, and so on. That's what we're talking about by creating a positive climate. It's not restorative, it's formative and transformative. But if you do that well, and we say 80% of the time, then when those bubbles do bounce into one another and move in opposite directions, or in rare cases they explode, you can fix it. But if you haven't built it, there's nothing to repair. So we think that there's many different proxies for what a positive school climate looks, feels, and sounds like. But our go-to strength-based model is school connectedness because it is very easy to wrap your heads around. And I think that the upcoming proposals for the school climate surveys are going to focus on the measures of connectedness, at least in part. So the measures of connectedness in no particular order. And what we want to make sure is that every child is highly connected to school, according to these 5 measures. Feeling close to people at school, having friends, not just one close friendship group, because we know that happens every 15 minutes, you're in and out in middle school, but friends in many, many different arenas: academic friends, social friends, sports friends, arts friends, and so on. And a non-negotiable in school is that every student should have at least one adult in their life that they feel they can go to at school at any moment. We hope that they have multiple adults, but at least one. School should be a destination. It should be a happy place. Kids should get up in the morning and be very excited to go and see their friends, learn new things, have fun, be a part of a community. We like to say Disney without the snacks and the rides. The third thing is a sense of belonging. And you see that notion of belonging. Again, people are hardwired to be in relationship, is in the standards. But it doesn't have to be the whole school. It could be a project, a team, something that says, I'm here, I'm valued, I matter. The fourth thing is that adults at school treat students fairly. And fairness is about making sure that not everybody gets the same exact thing, which is equality. It's about equity. And a key element of being treated fairly, and we talk extensively about this in restorative practice training, is that feeling as though you're treated fairly is having a voice, being heard. And that is at the core of working restoratively. And the fifth thing is feeling safe in this school. Kids who are highly connected to school do well. They're there, they attend. And working restoratively is not a cookie cutter approach. It enables each and every adult, whether they're an administrator, a para, a teacher, a counselor, a psychologist, it doesn't matter, to be strategic in their own practice and adapt the rules of the game to their individual uniqueness and job. So what we say is you got to trust the process. Now, this is a little busy of a slide, but just to point out a few important things. First of all, the horizontal line with the arrows sort of in the center right of this slide has the punitive to permissive axis. Unfortunately, too many people think that if students aren't held accountable punitively, then they're getting away with something. If they're getting away with something, that's not working restoratively. We are absolutely going to hold everybody accountable. That's a myth. We also know that as educators, we are charged to fill kids' toolboxes. Some of them arrive totally empty, and other kids' toolboxes, which have no compartments, there's not an academic set of tools and a social relational set of tools. Sometimes that toolbox is filled with really rusty, rotten tools, like the tool that says, you know, use 4-letter words all the time, or the tools that say, if somebody gets too close to you, hit them. Those are not good tools for life. But the most important part of this is that when you think about helping kids develop academically, we never give up. If they struggle, we layer on more support, whether it's one-on-one paras, tutoring, extra help, evaluations. We never give up on academic mastery. Unfortunately, historically, we have treated behavior entirely different, as if they make a mistake, they turn around and break a rule. It's completely different. We just send them out. Well, they're not going to learn better schools that way. So think about relational, social, behavioral skills no different than academics. If they don't have those skills, they need those skills. They need to practice them, they need to be taught them, and so on. But I will say again, we're not crazy. Sometimes kids cannot be in the social environment because of their skill level. But that doesn't mean we throw them away and say, you're out of the school, you're out of the community forever. We need to help support them to get the skills they need to be socially adept. So we're always going to hold students accountable. Now, they may need some chill time, some calm down time, some reflection time, and they may even need it out of the classroom or out of the school, but they don't need to do time. Schools and after-school programs are educational institutions. We're not criminal institutions. So the accountability is making amends, repairing, restoring, and so on, apologizing, making it right. And doing this is much harder and educational than doing time. Now, when you work restoratively, this is not how it works. I'm telling you, we don't give kids a choice made up by an adult. It comes out of a process. But if there was a food fight in a middle school cafeteria, and we gave that table with the food fight a choice, remember, this is not how the process works, but if we gave them a choice, of having a week of lunch detention or sitting with those custodians, learning the impact of what they did on that custodian's day and having to listen to the impact and figure out together with those custodians how they're going to give back and make it right, which would they choose? Detention, because that's easy. It's hard to sit down with those who have been harmed and figure out how you move forward. So one of the paramount and key ways we work restoratively is in circles. Again, this isn't training, this is an overview. But the reason why we use circles is that, first of all, just putting people in circles fosters a sense of belonging and community, no matter the reason or topic. And only 7% of communication is the words themselves. The other 93% is body language, eye contact, tone of voice, pitch, tone, volume. So when people work in circles, communication is better. Now, there are all kinds of circles. We go over all of these in training. But we wanted to play for you a little video coming out of Florida because it has leaders at all levels talking about the benefits of restorative practices. But within this video, probably the best aspect of it is that you see about 25 different circles that are used primarily for academics. And you know that because there's textbooks, there's notebooks, they're doing math, they're doing all kinds of work. This is how you get it done. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. We'll make sure this is posted, but just to share with you what this work really looks like and the benefits.
Restorative practice has changed the environment in our classroom. It's given children, especially on the spectrum in my classroom, a chance to speak out where normally they would remain quiet.
Restorative practice is, the way we look at it is a way for all students, staff, and teachers to build community and be involved. And that's kind of the approach that we took.
In our classroom, it's taken on various themes. At the beginning of the year, it was more getting children used to just talking with each other, feeling comfortable with their friends, and knowing it's a safe place to discuss things. There's no right answers, there's no wrong answers, but that we can all discuss.
First thing I think about when I think about restorative practices is the relationship piece between our teachers and our students and our students and our students. It's for them to have a discussion about a multitude of things. It could be a conflict, it could just be getting to know each other, but it's building that relationship piece.
What emotion you are showing us, and then we'll talk about what made us think of that emotion.
I feel that my shyer students that would normally not say much of anything have come out of their shell.
Relationship building, get to know your students. You're going to have a lot in common with them.
So the most important part for this age group, I feel, is the opportunity for them to share their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, just their opinions sometimes on what they're thinking. So what we're doing is developing that trust with one caring adult, at least one caring adult for every student in the school. So that first period teacher is their caring adult for those students. And we know that that is valuable. The research tells us that makes the difference in school.
When you don't know how to communicate how you're feeling, you act out. And so through the circles and through some social skills that we do every day, kids are learning how to ask for help. They're learning the I can messages so that they can let the person know that's bothering them, this is what you're doing and I need you to stop.
I'm actually very pleased. I have 3 non-English speaking students in my class. And at the beginning, they were very timid, didn't really want to say anything at all. And as we keep practicing, they want to have that chance to just one word and then, okay, I'm going to try a full sentence, and they're getting more confident. So just in that piece alone, I'm happy to see kids that have a quieter voice have a chance to, okay, well, I'm not passing judgment here. None of my classmates seem to, okay, I'm going to give it a try.
It is literally the natural way in which to do a class. I cannot see myself from this point forward teaching a class that doesn't have some type of restorative practice.
Culture of the school has been completely changed.
it is phenomenal. What you see is you see true relationships between students and teachers. You also see the students feeling a sense of trust. If I messed up, it's okay. We're going to talk it out. We're going to move forward. Instead of being just punitive, we're learning to rebuild.
The peer-to-peer interactions have become more sincere. The kids get along better. I have a better relationship with them much earlier on. And it really got my class through like some truly like tough times. I set it up as a way to build culture, but the restorative circles are happening naturally as kind of intended when big events happen. The processes and strategies are already in place because I'm using them as part of my morning meeting.
I thought with my 7th graders sitting around in a circle, it wasn't going to work. But after laying down what I expected during the circle, they really get into it. They quiet, on Monday mornings, I don't even have to really, say, hey, it's time. They start forming the circle. I let my kids sit on the tables. So it's an added little plus, but it's bound on conversation. So it's pretty good.
Because we start every staff meeting in a circle. It's definitely something that we do every time we meet. They're changing the way, with time constraints, they're making the time to have the circles.
We encourage our teachers to do it the first week of school to team build class rules and norms together. And then for problems that may come up. And maybe I have a substitute one day in my class and the sub left a report that wasn't the best report. Okay, let's circle up. Let's talk about what happened yesterday. What can we do to improve and get better for next time we have a sub?
I was a little hesitant just because I didn't know much about it, but I did. My principal gave me a few books to read. I also looked online and I watched a few videos online as well before I conducted my own meeting. And then a lot of things that I read just said start off simple and then start building from there. So right now it's still the beginning of the year. So we have our check-in, we have our conversation and talk about the topic that we could work on together. And then we check out with it. And the students actually look forward to it. They know it's going to be a restorative circle meeting day. Then they come ready.
I would say you just have to do it. That's step number one, and make it something easy. My first restorative practice circle was them sharing what they did this summer. And that's all we did for the first time. And the second time was, what's your one goal that you would like to achieve in chorus?
I think in some way it kind of motivates them, and I can't wait until we follow up with them to see like if they're actually doing better or not.
We took the approach of, yes, this is something else, but we're all ready. We all have the heart to do this. We all became teachers because we wanted to prepare students to become individuals who can make a difference in the community after graduation.
So I just found the restorative circles really help my students, the ones that are really shy and afraid to speak and share their feelings, that it brought them out. Whereas in the past, they would have never said anything.
Just that I think it'd be nice for you to try. I don't think, you don't feel like anybody's judging you about it. Use it in the best way you see fit to build your classroom, to build your classroom community and your classroom family.
I'm a firm believer that it is relationships that a kid, even we think that are so far gone. If you build that relationship, it's almost an immediate turn.
The restorative practice to me has been like a mind-blowing experience these last few months, man. Just learning the system, understanding what it is, learning my kids, really knowing what it is they're going through, getting them to learn me. I mean, it's been, any teacher who's not doing it, I just think that you're missing out on like a really awesome experience, not about your classroom, not about your content, but about knowing the kids.
Okay, so what we wanted to end with is some data, but one of the reasons, or a list of reasons why if restorative environments are so much better, why aren't they restorative? Well, a lot of it is habit. We just done it this way for years. It was good enough for me. Somehow I got through it. Sometimes people worry about losing control in the classroom. Actually, you have more control when you're working restoratively. And many people believe it's harder to create a restorative classroom. It's actually easier. It's easier and it runs so smoothly that it's just a joy to be there. Often people say that restorative takes more time, and that's when people think that it's exclusively about restoration, because that is really the least of it. It's how you practice in the day-to-day. But we think that the biggest reason why there aren't more educators who are restorative is they just don't know how. This is not in pre-service at this point. So how can anybody be expected to work restoratively if they don't know how? And that's why training is so important. So, Pat, are there any questions? I mean, we're going to open this up for questions in just a
There are
minute.
no questions in the chat. No.
Okay, so let's just look at some data and then we will use the last few minutes for a conversation. We'll stop sharing slides. This is a graph coming out of Washington. And this is a high school where, and high schools, you know, many high school teachers think that they're there for content, not for relationship building. But you can see, it's not that old, this graph, but they chose 5 different academic areas. And we don't know if the measures were mastery tests or you know, grades or final test scores or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But you can see on the far left-hand bar in 2009 and 10 where they were in these 5 academic areas. And then they were leading with instruction at that point. And then the administration said, no, the most important thing is relationships. That's what's going to be our priority, our North Star, our theory of action. And you can see in everything but algebra, I guess there was nowhere much below where they were to go. The scores or the measures dipped in year 2. But once those educators understood what it meant to lead with relationships, you can see how academics soared. Now, this is one of our favorite testimonials coming out of Northwestern Regional High School here in Winsted. And this is a quote that we received in an email. In 2011-12, our high school had chronic absenteeism of 23.7%. With intention, we focused our efforts on improving our school climate and implementing restorative practices in our way of being. Positive relationships were at the heart of everything we did. We focused on people over problems. Our administrative and school counseling offices became areas of refuge, places where students came to proactively problem-solve situations. This shift had a major effect on our attendance and learning. Because of this shift, our chronic absenteeism dropped to 3.1%. And in 2017-18, our high school was honored as a school of distinction for academics in the state. Now, this is East Lyme High School, and this is very, very recent data, and I hope you're not, this is just in 1 year because they just started implementing in 2021 to 2, and then again, so this is in 1 year of implementation. And it looked like grade 9 or grade 10 increased, but actually it did not, because if you look, grade 9 turned into grade 10 turned into grade 11, and so on. Just in 1 year, they had incidents dropping from 1208 to 871. So a total decrease in incidents of 337. And then the location of the incidents, it dropped in every single category. They were dealing with it different. They were focusing on relationship building. So a decrease, and this is just in 1 year. Now, Stanford Alternative Ed, in Stanford, if you're not attending, you're chronically absent, they send you to alternative education. So all of the teachers, we trained all of the teachers in restorative practices and climate. And as a result of focusing on restorative practices and climate, in 1 school year, 17-18 to 18-19, there was a 55% decrease in the number of days students were absent from school, which increased the number of days schools were in attendance. And when they had summer school that year, they were overrun. They were shocked. They didn't have enough room for all these kids who wanted to be in summer school. Now, in Stanford, this was the COVID year, Rippewam Middle School. In the fall of 2019, I know this was October of 2019, the teachers identified 157 kids who were disconnected to adults. They worked strategically within their school to make sure they built those relationships. And this was February of 2020. So about a month before schools were closed, that number dropped to 40. And that had a major impact on chronic absenteeism, which basically was cut in half. And the number of out-of-school suspensions dropped from 275 to 35. And I know I was speaking with the principal right before COVID closed everything down, and they were ready to bring down the number of out-of-school suspensions to 0 the next year. This is Washington State that has taken on this work as a statewide effort. In 4 counties, in Thurston County, they used substance abuse treatment instead of incarceration, and teen arrests for drugs were down 39%. In Walla Walla County, they increased youth support programs and common awareness of trauma and relationships, and youth suicide rate dropped 59%. In Kipsick County, they increased nurse home visiting and parenting programs for young families. Domestic violence incidents dropped by 30%, 37%. And in Okanogan County, since training all teachers and students about trauma and the importance of relationship building, youth arrests for violent crimes are down 66%. And this saved the state of Washington $1.4 billion over 10 years. So I would venture to say that the investment in working restoratively is going to save a huge amount of money in addition to social capital. So this is where we've ended. And I'm going to put up our contact information before I stop sharing here so that we can answer questions and have an open dialogue. But if you want to take a screenshot, this is how you reach us, but certainly through CAS, you can reach us. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have either a conversation. I'm not sure we can open mics, but people can chat or whatever. Tiffany, I don't know how you want to gauge this, but I'm going to stop sharing so we can have that kind of conversation, answer questions in the chat.
Absolutely. We can keep an eye on the chat. We can look at the any questions that come in.
There is a question there, Joanne. I don't know if can you see the chat because it's a long question.
Okay.
From Kate Lund, related to training all district staff, engaging in online modules from the GNC, you know, the Global Compliance Network, and some of which are state mandated, inclusive of the Anti-Bullying Connecticut. Asking if we have any insight as it relates to the anticipated updates to this traditional module. Not sure. I'm not certain that GNC is updating right now. This piece of legislation that we have is quite new. I'm not sure if it's, you know, legislative specific.
Kate, that brings up a very interesting point. And I know that for years and years before COVID, I know I personally was asked if I could create online modules around climate and restorative work. And I always said, impossible, because this is about relationship building. And how can you possibly build relationships online? And then COVID hit and we sort of had to do it. I'm very glad we're back to in person. And I'm sure that if that comes out, that probably would satisfy training. But I think for individuals who have difficulty understanding what this looks like on the ground, that may be less successful than, you know, in-person training. Other questions? Now, Dwight Sharp says that CIRC is going to know about professional learning resources as recognized. I'm sure CIRC is one of those locations, but it's not the only one. You can go to CAPS, you can go to CAS, you could go to your RESTs as well. So it's not one over another. And I think word of mouth, reputation, and so on. So is there any other questions that you might want to? I know we've still got quite a few people on, and we wanted to make sure we left time for some questions.
As a reminder to everyone, we did record this session. We are going to send the recording and the slides out Usually it is the next day, so probably by tomorrow, but it will be within 48 hours to everyone who registered. So you are, free to share those with anybody who was not able to be here, or reference those.
Want to thank everybody. Will we start training staff in the fall of 25, or does this need to happen? Annie, I think that as soon as you can train staff, the better, which is why immediately when this happened, we sat down with Tiffany and we talked explicitly about how we could get ahead of this. So I wouldn't wait. If you can, we call them scout teams, allow teams to come and check out what this work is. You'll be ahead of the game, because just by adopting or implementing the policy doesn't mean that you will automatically start working restoratively. So if that makes sense. Any other questions? Oh, Tom, you were there. Thank you for coming. And Tom, I don't know if, I hope we shared accurate information. So because we're not the attorneys of record. But thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We really appreciate it. And certainly reach out to us personally, reach out to Tiffany.
Absolutely. Reach out to CAS. And I just want to say again, Tom being here is a great reminder. If you have any specific questions or you need clarification, we always encourage you to reach out to your own counsel for the district or, representatives, so that you are getting information that is pertinent to your specific district and situation.
That's always the best strategy. And a number of the questions were about certification and so on. And I would clarify that with your board attorneys, just so you get good guidance.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a smooth week. And you will receive all of this in an email.
So thank you all. Have a wonderful summer. Hope to cross paths at some point.
Big thanks to you, Tiffany, and to Cass.
Absolutely.
We are glad to be partnering for this. It's important.